Anyone have the hack MD? So welcome, folks. Today is February 22nd, and we are meeting in, we're meeting. Can someone please drop the hack MD in? We're not quite prepared, so. Anyone has it open? If not, I can go to the velero.io. Oh, thank you. Scott is prepared. So I am going to share my screen now. So just a reminder, if everyone looks at the link in the chat, if you can please add your name and affiliation, just to double check everyone's seeing the right screen, correct? Yep. Okay. I'm going to do it myself because I have not done this yet. Do we have February 22nd? Fabulous. Okay. And I want to talk about and I don't know if we have any maintainers who want to give status updates. I'll give you all a minute to add anything in. So Daniel has his name, which is excellent. So Daniel, let's hand it off to you if you'd like to give a status update. You are muted, Daniel. If you're talking, we cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm muted. Hey guys. Yeah, I'm still editing the HackMD. So this week I have been mainly working on the plan for 1.9 and have them put in the roadmap, discuss with Eleanor and assign folks in the team to work on it. And I'm started the investigation on the CSI plugin. I may discuss with you in the upcoming weeks to understand the gaps for GA. Per discussion with Eleanor, we may want to first GA the features that do not require the data movement, and later when we working on the data movement layer design in parallel, and we will have a plan for GA this CSI plugin that requires data movement. And in addition to that, I spent some time to work on the issue 4080 yesterday. I'm gonna have a quick discussion with you guys regarding how we should fix it. And that's yeah, probably all I have. I'll add it to put in this HackMD file.
Oh, thanks, Daniel. I know I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments for Daniel?
Yeah, so Daniel, you had mentioned you'll build 1728, an RC that we can check.
Yeah. Yesterday, when I checked, we are still working on it, and we see some error in our pipeline, so fixing it. Wenkai, do you have an update for 172?
Yeah, we have upgraded the Golang version and fix some of the CVE, but not all of them are fixed because some of CVEs are introduced by the base image and the REST binary. We do not recompile the REST binary.
Yep.
So yeah, some of the CVEs are fixed, but not all of them.
So has they been pushed to the Docker Hub? I mean, the images?
You mean the RC?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay, so we'll keep you updated. So Wenkai, I think we can do it today or tomorrow, right?
Yeah. We can push it today.
Does that, Sukarna, did that answer your question? I think that was Sukarna. You were the one who asked, right? I didn't see the name, but.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that's fine. I think so I guess the only question would be whatever are remaining, if REST is actually affected, or is it just not applicable? It's just a Golang issue not applicable to REST. If we can get that clarification, that might be.
Yeah, I think the risk for REST is relatively low by reading the CVE.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments for Daniel? Okay, I am assuming because no one else has, does anyone else want to give a status update? I assume because I don't see any other names there, the answer is no. Okay, discussion topics. By the way, we've announced 1.8 was out, right? I think that we've said this in some meeting, or if you don't know, 1.8 is out, very exciting. Let me hand it over to Daniel, who I'm pretty sure put that fix for, he wants to talk about 4080. Am I correct, Daniel? Would you like me to unshare my screen? Do you want to share yours, or should I just pull up the issue?
I need a minute, sorry. I'll share my screen, but let me open that issue.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to edit the HackMD, but it still look weird.
Daniel, do you want me to talk about the roadmap first, and then you can do 4080 after?
Yeah.
Perfect. So with 1.8 done, we are basically done with the 1.9 roadmap, although we still do care about feedback, and maybe there can be tweaks. So I'll try to do this. My goal is to cover this in about 3 minutes, but obviously ask more questions if you'd like. Things are roughly distributed. We've got P0s, which are like, boy, are we going to try very hard to get into the release. P1s, which are more opportunistic. We hope to get them in the release, but we accept they may not. And then there's a P2 and a P3 just to show relative priority. So our P0s, we really want to get a data movement layer into Velero's architecture, taking the data mover from the Velero plugin for vSphere, move it over to Velero proper. Bridget, who did the existing design doc and did much of this work, is no longer with us. So what we're saying is that for 1.9 period, this is going to be an investigation, a design period, because the existing team is not terribly familiar with the architecture and wants to understand it before they do such a big move. So our hope, unless additional dependencies come up, is that we'll begin the actual programming work in 1.10, coding work. We've also have kind of a late joiner to the list, but one that we feel very strongly about. It's this idea of, we have a CSI plugin. It is decently functional, we think. We have not brought it to GA because we worry about systems that implement CSI, but that do not actually move the snapshot after the snapshot is triggered. So our plan is to bring it to GA just for AWS and Azure. There's a few benefits. One is that we're generally encouraging people to use CSI, but more importantly, at least on AWS and possibly on Azure, I'm still looking into this. It's a lot safer from a credential point of view if you use the CSI plugin for AWS rather than our AWS plugin. And then, so we're going to bring to GA the AWS and Azure, which we know do have a data mover underneath. Everyone else, or every other place, we're going to have big letters somehow saying, user, be very careful, use at your own risk. And then once we get this data mover moved to Velero in a few releases, my understanding is that we may hook it up to the CSI plugin. And finally, we can handle environments that have CSI snapshotting, but no data movement. So this is also an investigation, because again, the team who is here now has never worked with the CSI plugin. So of course they need time to look into it, think about how to protect the user. We will look into all the existing open issues because maybe there are bugs that we need to fix. We just really don't feel like we know the status. Now, Dave, if Dave has any institutional knowledge, we probably would love to hear it. I'm sure we'd love to hear it. But just so you know, this is going to be, so this is an investigation for 1.9. So 1.10, we're hoping to do that work tentatively. Upload progress, we've talked a lot about. We want to understand what parts Dave can work on, what parts we'll work on, but that's certainly, boy, we want to get that all done for 1.9. Carvel is a method of installation that is used in Tanzu. So we have been working on the packaging for vSphere, but it is open source. So anyone else who wants to use Carvel to install, please do so. We are going to continue improving the Velero testing. Dan Feng and Wenkai and others and Ming have done an excellent job of really improving our testing, and we want to continue. We'll do this every release. We want to keep investing in making Velero more trustworthy, and users can trust what's happening. Qubit Builder Tech Debt. If people have questions on that, I will entirely defer to the engineering team, but I am told that it modernizes our code base and is worthwhile to do. And then we've got a few, let's call them smaller issues that we think are kind of pesky for users and we want to improve. One thing is, for instance, my understanding is right now, when the Velero server fails, it doesn't kind of fails silently. It doesn't easily surface errors. And so we want to make it both so that users yeah, basically provide API support to understand what errors the Velero server is happening, is throwing. We have 2 related to backup storage. Okay, basically backup storage location, my understanding is the status is sometimes temperamental. Even if the backup storage location is actually available, sometimes it'll show not available. So this one, I believe these 2 are very closely related. This one is kind of clarify how it's working. And I believe that this is a fix to fix the status. So look in those issues and feel free to ask more questions. But again, it should make it clear whether a backup storage location is actually down or not. We want to fix some docs issues. We've divided them into 2 categories because as we plan our roadmap, of course, engineering time is limited. So we've got 4 issues that require engineering input. They're 3 of the 4 are very general issues that have to do with, hey, explain how a restore works better. Adding a few, so a user asked for some specific examples how to do a cluster migration. And because our cluster migration page is kind of small, we wanted to do better. And then I believe it was RESTIC and volume snapshot examples, kind of saying a little more about that, which is a pretty basic use case. And lastly, there's something about Azure service provider permissions. Anyways, it's one of the 4 here if you're curious. It has 13 upvotes. So clearly a lot of Velero users feel this pain. So we really wanted to try to solve that. And we've got 2 that we hope to get in, but we put as P1 because they're a little lower priority. These are for Abby or anyone else who feels like picking up docs issues that don't really require engineering input. At this point, I'm going to stop just because I think I've gone over time. Well, you know what? I'm going to pause. If we finish our discussions early, I will keep going through the roadmap. I'll merely say that we've got, actually, you know what? I can basically finish it. Basically, we've got some smaller P1s that we hope to get to. You can look into them more here. Actually, yeah. And then this one in particular is kind of, we don't say anything about Velero performance or resource limits. So we'd like to at least put something in the documentation. Copia. We have a 3rd investigation. This is a very investigation heavy release, which kind of makes sense because we have a team that is fairly new to Velero. So we have to do a bunch of investigation. And frankly, Copia is new to us as well. This would potentially replace RESTIC, although I believe from a user point of view, it should be minimal impact. It's much more from a developer point of view, I guess. As I said, we get a number of benefits. One is that we get incrementals for vSphere and potentially other platforms as well. It allows us to move away from RESTIC, which is not ideal in a number of ways. It's not terribly well supported and it's slow and other issues. And for instance, Copia will come with encryption at rest. Now, it's not a feature that we can just automatically offer to Velero users. We don't want Velero users to accidentally hurt themselves by losing their credentials. So we have to think carefully about how to offer the feature to Velero users, but Copia just brings a whole bunch. I should have said it's a repo, an open source repo. So we're going to investigate that. And then a bit more docs work and then work here that anyway, might depend on item snapshot or maybe on upload progress, or maybe upload progress depends on that. This one I think may change in the next week or 2, depending on what Dave tells us. So that was a lightning fast going through 1.9. Any questions or comments? Oh, and by the way, Sean had commented at the very top, giving feedback. I believe Daniel replied, I asked Daniel about this and I don't think we managed to get a comment yet, but we will comment on that. Sean also asked for parallelization. We totally want to do that. We just feel like there's enough investigations in 1.9 that we don't really want one more unless Sean wants to do it. But we are very excited we are absolutely in line that we want to do parallelization as well. And we're just slightly higher prioritizing bringing the CSI snapshotter to GA, the data mover and the Copia, because they're just so impactful. And Raphael, less relevant now because he's actually working on something else. So we've already talked to him. Okay, let me pause. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, a quick question. I know at one point the plugin versioning was pushed from 1.8 to 1.9. It sounds like that's pushed again out of 1.9 at this point.
Basically, Bridget, because that was kind of something
Yeah.
that Bridget was owning.
Right,
So
exactly.
she's left, we don't have a natural. And I know that Fong was considering working on it. So if Fong wants to work on it, that's great. Basically, in short, if it's something we need, this is how we've prioritized. If anyone wants to jump in and work on it, we would encourage you to.
Of course.
But yes, it has been bumped from 1.9.
Okay.
Scott, before Bridget left VMware, we went through the design. She refined it, and I think it looked better now because previously there was some confusion. Why don't you check the latest update in the design and
Yeah, I'll look at that. Yeah, I kind of fell off looking at that. I hadn't looked at it recently, so I'll look at that again.
Yeah. The reason we didn't put it in the 1.9 is that we don't feel there is a very urgent requirement requiring this mechanism. If there is, we can consider and adjust the price.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think on our side we'll need to look at as well, because I know we have a use case, basically on our with our plugins with OpenShift, we have an issue with image stream tags where we have a race condition that really needs a new plugin method to resolve, and so this is something that we were kind of waiting on to get something in place for that. I'll need to talk to Dylan about this offline to see. I'm not sure if that priority is lowered for us now or it's the same as it was, because I actually had an initial kind of proof of concept of how to fix the problem, which modified the plugin interface. So we actually couldn't get that in the code base. We need to wait for plugin versioning because the fix involves adding a new method to the restore item action plugin. So we obviously can't change that until we have plugin versioning.
And I'm trying to remember, so this was also needed for adding the timeout functionality.
Yes, that's true. That was the other use case. And I know that was the case that Fung had. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So the problem we are facing is this is for kind of app consistency use cases. Unless we can guarantee defined timeout, we can't use the pre and post hooks to say lock a database, unlock a database, because there is no guarantee when done post hook will run.
Yeah. Right. So we do have two use cases that need this. It's just a question of figuring out, getting the design finalized and then having someone to have time to start working on it. It sounds like.
Yes.
So dare I say, this is where I want Daniel and others engineers to speak up, but if as you're saying, for 1.9, if you have engineers to work on it, I think that the team will certainly work to get it in. If you don't, then we can definitely have a more serious conversation for 1.10 about it.
Yep, that makes sense. And again, that's where I need to talk to Dylan on our side, because I know we have several things, that we've got to cut our priorities to figure out what's the most important for us to work on.
We all want everything, right? But yeah, exactly. It comes down to
course.
prioritization.
Yeah, because the plugin framework is a very fundamental mechanism in Velero. So probably before we GA it, we want to do some POC and verify the design. So it may take a relatively long time.
Yeah, because
you go.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, ideally, really, before we release this, not only do we need to actually implement this feature, but then we need to implement the use cases on top of that, so that we have, the timeouts, for example, and then this other case for the additional items plugin. Because if you don't have the, you versioned it, but unless you've added something to that version, it's hard to sort of prove that it's doing anything useful until you actually have those changes there. So you really need to have all three of those together in a release, whether it's 1.9 or 1.10, it's just, but they're all kind of dependent on each other, because we can't even really start working on these other features that depend on the versioning until the versioning design is worked out and ready to get committed to.
Yeah. So I envision that the versioning and the actual feature that rely on the versioning may be GA'd in one version, because before that we're gonna do a lot of POC and verify the design. If there is a concrete implementation that leverage that versioning mechanism, and we feel this is a solid offering, we just GA the versioning mechanism and this feature together. That's right. I think, yeah,
that makes sense, because it doesn't really make sense to say we have versioned plugin interfaces, but we don't actually have any additional versions there. So it's not really,
I actually, Dave, I have the same feeling regarding the upload progress monitor. Are we gonna GA the plugin type first, then in some future version to deliver the item snapshot or plugin implementation, or we GA something together?
Well, I mean, the item snapshotter plugin we put in, right? That got loaded into 1.8 actually, right?
Mhm.
So we can look at, for example, like maybe even with the CSI snapshotter,
Mhm.
we can look at moving that into the item snapshotter.
Mhm.
One of the things that I thought we should look at in terms of the CSI plugin is the CSI plugin is not a volume snapshotter.
Mm.
It's backup item actions, and
Correct.
it's a little funky because it's actually entwined. It's a special plugin, right? There's things that only happen because it's CSI. So it might be a good time to look at that and kind of pull it into like a general framework.
Mhm.
So we could consider doing that with the CSI. I actually have a version of it that works with the item snapshotter, but it's pretty primitive.
Okay, I'll reach out to you after we do some investigation, and we can continue the discussion. I'm also thinking it may make sense to GA the CSI plugin after it's transformed to item snapshotter, but we need to look at the timeline because there are some dependencies like vSphere plugin want to leverage that and etc.
Yeah. Well, the vSphere plugin can't move to CSI until all the data movement stuff works. So.
But yes, but yeah, there are some details. Last time I checked with the guys in the vSphere team. But,
yeah. Plus, don't forget you have to do backwards compatibility, Jim.
mm-hmm.
So Scott, hopefully we kind of answered that question. Does anyone have any other questions about the roadmap before we move on to 4080, Daniel's fun new bug? Okay, so Daniel, I'll stop sharing and you said you want to share, is that correct? Yeah. And may I just suggest, by the way, looking at the plan for today, we've covered the roadmap. So Daniel's going to talk about 4080, and we've got two other PRs to discuss. So I'm going to let's try to time box you, Daniel, to 10 minutes, and we'll see where we are. And that way, everyone gets 10 minutes, and then we have 5 minutes of wiggle room. Does that sound okay? Basically, can I set a timer for 10 minutes, and we'll see where we are in 10 minutes?
Yeah. Just let me know.
Yes, you'll hear it. You'll hear it go off. I will. Yeah. So start sharing, and then 10 minutes I'll interrupt, and we'll see where we are.
Yeah, so the issue is 4080. Actually, it's not a new bug. It's open like in the August, but it was transferred from Bridget to me before she left. So the issue is caused by the CRD remapping plugin, which is a backup item action plugin that try to fetch the CRD via V1 beta 1 if the item to backup is a V1 CRD, but it has violation. So when user upgraded to the Kubernetes version 1.22, this plugin caused issue because for some input V1 CRD, it has violation. Then the plugin tried to back up the CRD via V1 beta 1 API, but it does not exist in Kubernetes 1.22. It was removed. Then the backup failed, and this issue was opened. And Bridget did some initial investigation, and her suggestion is that we should just document and make sure that user upgrade all the V1 beta 1 CRDs to the V1 in the the new version of Kubernetes before he start to use Velero to do the backup. But there is some disagreement here. Like, first, there's a lot of work. Second, there's some disagreement and people are trying to fix it. And I did some investigation. I think actually we have two choices. First, we just do what Bridget suggested, and make the plugin fail early. So if there is a violation, user need to fix their CRD. And second, probably we can change the code in the CRD remapping plugin, because I noticed there is a restore item action to modify the preserve unknown fields, which is one of the violation caused by the old CRD format. So if we change the code in the CRD remap plugin, so it will use the discovery client to check what version of CRD is supported in current Kubernetes cluster. If there's only V1, no V1 beta 1, we bypass that plugin and allow user to back up. So the content that is backup may be invalid for V1 CRD, but we can leverage this restore item action plugin to mitigate it, because the most cases mentioned in this thread is related to this field. So I briefly discussed Genting about these two choices yesterday. First, we fail early and let user fix the CRD. Second, just the second option I mentioned, but there is a risk that the CRD that is backed up may be invalid. So it failed. If user will see this issue when they do the restoration. Well, many of the cases will be fixed by the restore item action, but some may still fail. If that happens, user need to fix the V1 beta 1 CRD in the source cluster and back up again, or they need to write a restore item action. Maybe we can enhance the restore item action plugin to handle this migration scenario better. So I have a PR for that and verified. So I just want to discuss with you guys, shall we proceed with this option 2? Any comments?
Well, I think if you can handle it automatically, it's definitely the nice thing.
Yeah.
So the question is, can we do it reliably?
We cannot handle all the violations reliably. That's the current status. We can handle this particular case, but there are other cases. If you look at the one of the this is the user's V1 CRD. There's some violation in the condition. In addition to the issue in this field, there may be other problems that currently we are not handling very well in the restore item action, but we handle this violation.
So I'm just thinking, we probably don't want to like silently delete fields or anything like that, because then you don't know that's happening. But would it make sense to let the remap plugin give it some options, and you could let the user add in fields that are going to be ignored or deleted on restore?
Actually, the remap plugin is a backup item action. What it does is it checks the content of the V1 CRD. If it has violation or some condition, it meets some condition, it will try to get the CRD via V1 beta 1. And in V1 beta 1, there is no such a violation, because that's a valid CRD for V1 beta 1.
Right. So it's on restore that we run into issues, right?
No. The issue is that plugin stopped working in version 1.22 Kubernetes, because there is no V1 beta 1.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So currently there is no issue in restore because the backup fails. But then there's some unhappiness from users. So and I also noticed that Nolan added very early, there is a restore item action try to fix this issue. It's not removing this field silently. It has done some migration according to the suggestion in Kubernetes document. But the impact for that is we don't have restore item action to handle all the violations. And it can be tricky because we cannot test all the scenarios. So yeah, I'm a little hesitant regarding which option, but since Genting has some strong opinions, I think the second is better. I'm not sure.
Sounds fine to me. I mean, at some point you need to like clean these things up. So, you know, the user needs to clean
this
those out.
happen. So I'm not familiar with. So this happens when the include cluster resources is true, and we're backing up the CRDs.
Yeah, that happens only when Velero dealing with CRD. Yeah, so any comments? Yeah, I think I'll leave it the issue and PR open for another couple of days. So it seems we are good to move on with this option 2. Okay, I don't know. I think we probably want to move on with option 2 with the silence.
Sounds good. Okay, great. And you did very well within time. You had 1 minute and 50 seconds left. Well, folks can think for the remainder of this meeting. If we have a little extra time at the end, we can kind of return to this, but thanks, Daniel, for walking us through that. The next is, I see we have a PR 4613. Does whoever want to talk about, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to?
Hey, hi. I can try sharing my screen.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, tell us what you want to talk about. Share your screen and we'll.
Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So this pull request is regarding a design for adding support for. So there are 2 PRs actually. Let's just discuss this one first. So the first one is adding additional spec field called existing resource policy on the restore API. So currently, as we know that if the resource already is present in the cluster, Velero skips over the restore. So we wanted to give some kind of policy spec which would enable the user to like perform patch on the resource if it has changed from the one present in the backup. So this design only pertains to Kubernetes resources and not PV data and as such. And so in the last discussion, we were asked to add some non-goals and update the use cases. So I did that and also wanted to discuss whether or not we should go ahead with the approach 1. I'll give some background about the approach number 1. So in this approach, we'll be just adding a existing resource policy spec to the restore API. This spec will be able to take in 3 policy types like none, update, and update all. So basically, if you see in the summary table, none preserves the existing Velero behavior and no action is performed. Similarly for the logging as well. But if the user specifies update policy in the restore, then Velero will try to patch on the changed resource. Let's say some service has mutated or secret has mutated. It will try to perform a patch, and it will also warn the user if the patch fails, like if the patch is regarding some immutable fields, that might give a warning. So that will error out and give us a warning. It won't perform any destructive actions. In the update all options, Velero will update labels on unchanged resources and will attempt a patch on the changed resources, and similar behavior will be observed with the logging as well. So this is the kind of behavior we are looking to implement via this proposal. So do you guys have any comments on this?
This one was not on my radar. I added some comment regarding the other design, but this one I haven't checked. I need to look into details. I currently I think the none policy is a very early design decision. I'm not sure. I believe they have discussed other possibility, to handle the restore when the resource already exists in the target Kubernetes cluster, but they choose to just skip. It's simpler to implement and it's very predictable. So
And just to clarify, the policy that we label as none here, that's basically current Velero behavior. That's what Velero currently does.
Yeah.
This provides additional, and we also envision possibly adding future policies. Like one policy that someone had suggested, for example, is that, you know, to handle immutable fields is if you really want to make sure that the object is there, we could actually have a policy that would delete and recreate items. We're not proposing implementing that now because that's potentially destructive. Hard to get right. We're just not thinking about that now, but that's a possible future, you know, a policy you could add as well.
But my concern is the update and update all seems a little straightforward, though I don't know the use case, but the update, you try to patch it, you need to calculate the delta correctly and patch it, and some may fail, some may succeed. So I think this may cause some unpredictable result. And I wanna understand. I'm not sure if anyone in this meeting have involved in the very early phase of Velero when they choose, you know, use the none policy for all resource.
Yeah, that all that decisions was certainly made before I was involved. I also wanted to clarify. You mentioned the update all is the use case. The basically update all is mostly like the regular update. The difference is that anytime Velero restores a resource, we have a label that labels what backup was used, and the update all, and so in the case where the resource exists already, so, you know, say you have a backup one and you restore it, you know, if you have a failover cluster. So today I do a backup, restore to the failover cluster. Tomorrow I do another backup and restore it to the failover cluster. For resources that didn't change between today and tomorrow, I still have that original resource, which means the failover cluster, if you look at it, you don't know that that object's been consulted and updated. So the update all basically would update those labels even for the unchanged resources. And the use case for this is, you know, say I delete a resource in the live cluster after backup one. Backup two is not there anymore. So when I restore that to the cluster, the resource that was deleted will not have an updated label, which means if I want to then, after I restore to that cluster, have some offline action that deletes anything from an old backup, I can use those labels because we've updated the labels. So that's the reason for the update all, is basically to allow the labels to get updated even for resources that haven't changed since the last restore. In terms of what the resources look like in the cluster, we're still, you know, if the resource is already there, we're not changing anything. But if it's changed and it's there, then we're updating it. So that's kind of the thinking around that. And you know, as you mentioned, the restore, the patch could fail in some cases. I think in the case where a patch fails, it ends up looking like the current policy, because basically you try to patch something, the patch fails, which means the resource is unchanged, and we have a warning that's, you know, that you can see on the restore. So when you look at your Velero restore at the end, you'll see these warnings for those resources that we failed to patch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if the update fails, the resource is so it fall back to none, essentially.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And the one reason that would definitely cause the update to fail is if the thing you're trying to restore is different in some immutable field. Because if you try to patch a resource and change an immutable field, then the Kubernetes update or patch is going to fail because it's an immutable field, and so then we'll have the Velero log with the failure and showing that warning.
This will get attached with the restore as well, right? The warning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, So basically, because you're showing because you're creating a warning and not just an info log. If you do a Velero describe on that restore, you know, all the warnings get enumerated there in that output. So you'll see it there.
Yeah. I think we need to. I hope I can talk to like Nolan or some very early maintainer of Velero regarding why the decision was made, and regarding the update. Another concern currently I have is that it may go. I see in future people may add more policy and like I want to patch this field, now that field. We need to control the complexity. You know, I see this maybe, you know, very tricky to maintain and support, because when user use update, they may expect something, but it didn't happen for various reasons. And yeah, we end up,
Yeah.
you know, keep
Yeah.
fixing bugs in this area. That would be
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
very ideal.
I think an extremely detailed policy like that, you know, some kind of structured kind of,
Mhm.
I think that's out of scope for this. I mean, that's not the kind of, you know, I think we need to keep the policies, you know, fairly high level as to, you know, don't
Yeah.
do anything or update the resource, or if we decide to add that potentially destructive and later, you know, delete and recreate, again, the policies themselves, even if the implementation is complex, it's not a configurable thing. You know, you're not saying, oh, I want to update, you know, this spec field, but not that spec field, because, you know,
Right.
that would become a UX nightmare for trying to configure it.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'll ask someone in the team, and I will also look at this design, and we need to discuss again later, because I haven't read through this.
Yeah, and
thanks for doing
yeah,
this.
and if anybody does have any other insight from kind of early discussions, I know there's a linked issue where some issues were discussed around that kind of ahead of time, which is we were kind of basing this partially on. But I don't know if Dave has any other insight as to, you know, I actually don't remember how long, Dave, you've been part of the team, but in terms of, you know, if there's any early discussions around this, or I think most of these decisions were made long before any of us on the call were involved in Velero.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we had we had discussions about this periodically, you know, when Nolan was here, because people ask for this feature fairly often. I think it's strictly conservatism in terms of not wanting to open the can of worms of what happens when you start updating on the restore.
Right.
But you know, the approach being taken here lets you select that behavior, and I think it's worthwhile to try it out and see, you know, what kind of trouble we get into.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it seems to me, just again, just looking at kind of high level with what we're proposing here, is that, you know, it seems that the patch itself ought to be a relatively safe thing, because, you know, either you succeed in modifying the object or you don't, and you warn, and you put a warning here. And so from the point of view of, you know, data integrity, I'm not seeing any obvious cases where this is adding risk. But obviously, you know, so aside from the risk associated with any, you know, new feature. But I mean, it doesn't feel like there's anything we're trying to do here that is specifically risky, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, understood.
I mean, I guess kind of the thing that, you know, the specific risk is that we're trying to roll things backwards, and we're not necessarily rolling everything backwards. And that's where you start to worry about things getting out of sync and just starting to get kind of wonky.
In other words, you have two things that change together, and we succeeded in one, but not together, because you don't have the transactional ability.
Or there's something new, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, got added afterwards. It depends on the first thing that you're patching backwards. So I think there's I think there's some good use cases for this. I think there's a lot of ways to cut your fingers off with it. I think, you know, it's worthwhile to give it a, you know, an investigation at least. I don't think, you know, just a flat no, but they definitely want to work through a bunch of use cases for it, or, you know, or let people try it out and they'll come back and be like, I got my fingers off.
Now, by the way, we've been 10 minutes into this discussion, and I do, Shubham, I think, do you have the other PR as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll let you decide relative importance. We can continue this discussion, or you might want to pause here, go to your other PR if you want to have us talk about both today.
So yeah, as
I
Daniel
was
said,
just gonna, sorry, I just wanted to
Yeah,
say
go
one
ahead,
thing about both. Yeah, sorry, just a general comment about both of these, because I know we've had these PRs up a couple of weeks now, and we're obviously, it's great now that we're getting more discussion around it and hoping to get some feedback. You know, we just we need to go to a point relatively soon, you know, if we want to get these into 1.9, where, you know, we've got enough feedback, we've got enough, you know, approval to have to say, yeah, like, okay, this is good to go. I mean, I don't want to rush anything, of course, but at the same time, I want to make sure that, you know, providing feedback has the kind of level of priority for the team, so that we can, you know, eventually say, okay, we have approval, we have sign off, this is good. Shubham can go and, start putting a implementation. Actually, we already have a couple of POC, PRs relating to this anyway, but, once we have a design that's approved, then we can start reviewing those PRs as well. And looking at the use cases to see if there's any use cases that are missed. But obviously, we're not going to be reviewing any of those implementation PRs because they're kind of at a draft level until the design itself is signed off. Because we know at this point the design is still subject to change until it's approved.
And dare I ask, like, I totally hear what you're saying. You're trying to develop your own feature, your own product. And obviously, if we're slower with cycles, you can't meet your deadlines. I assume you would have to fork if you.
Well,
if we can't get it in, then you might have to fork or something. All this to say is we really do want to encourage other, outside contributors from just the VMware team. So I think that we will try to do better at PR review. Maybe I think we're going to even be discussing some kind of SLA. And it's definitely, maybe we do prioritize some of our 1.9 stuff so that we can made our SLA for.
And to be clear, we have in the past, done things on our builds where we forked things to sort of put things in place because we needed it now, and then we push it up. But that adds layers and complexity because I put something in place in our fork, and then I take it upstream, and then we have some discussion and we improve it, and it's different. Now we have 2 versions of it. And the other thing we've done in the past, and we've actually backed this out, we don't want to do this anymore, is I don't want to make any changes that modify CRDs that aren't upstream first.
Well, and don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming you for forking in the past. I'm merely pointing out, if you have to fork, it stinks for you all because forking is tough. And it stinks for us because we're missing contributions from you all who could improve Velero directly. So I really, for 1.9, we're hoping to kind of come out with a PR review SLA, not merging, but certainly responses so we can keep the conversation going. And we will definitely deprioritize other issues in 1.9 if we need to.
And again, because both of these involve CRD changes, that's a specific area where I really don't want to mess with forking, because the CRDs are different. All of a sudden things get a lot messier. If it's a bug fix, if we have to get it in for a deadline and then push it upstream, that's fine. As long as in the eventually they all get reconciled and are the same. But when you start talking about API changes, I want it upstream first.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I think we definitely agree, and we'll the majority of the main VMware. Oh, sorry, you go, Daniel.
Yeah,
please.
Scott. So you mentioned you have a deadline for this on your side.
I would let Dylan speak. I don't know that. I don't know where to point necessarily the deadline yet. I know we're trying to come up with kind of development schedules and release stuff. So Dylan's on the call now. I think if he has it, yeah.
I can jump in. And I briefly mentioned this to Eleanor. I'm still working on kind of formally drafting up an explanation of kind of how our existing release cycle has worked and how we're trying to change it. We have customers that rely on Velero. We have our own release cycle where we're trying to avoid the process that we've gotten to in the past. It's a bad pattern of essentially carrying CRD fork fixes and then having to rebase it when we pull in the new releases. We're trying to stay more into like the upstream tip. We're probably looking at 3 to 4 months out, trying to get another release cut that can include this fix. And we'd ideally like to rebase it on an actual release branch for Velero. Obviously we're willing to, there's already an existing schedule for Velero. We're not trying to change that. But like the existing governance model for Velero, since I've been a part of it, is like if the design gets approved and gets merged, it's slated for the next release. I think we're just looking for maybe not. It's tough for us if we have to spin our wheels for 3 weeks awaiting for feedback on the design when we're trying to go get it implemented. And then that's how we always end up implementing these like, halfway fixes on our end that end up changing upstream. And then we have this rebase hell to go through. So that's all we're trying to do. We're not necessarily like a deadline to get these in, but it would stink if we missed 1.9 just due to the fact that the designs have been sitting kind of stale for a little bit. I think is only the concern we were trying to raise.
Yeah, so you're thinking that if we approve this design, you want to implement the feature in 1.9, right? But yeah, as you mentioned, that's also something I observed with Velero is that if a design is approved in version A, probably it will implement in version A+1 the earliest. that's a normal pattern of Velero that I observed also.
I think it depends on how quickly things move. I've seen it go both ways. For a really big feature, that tends to be that way because you spend a few months. For a big feature that affects a whole bunch of the code base, that's the norm. For smaller features, I've seen where, especially where if you get a design that's approved that everyone's kind of said, look, we like this, and it's relatively isolated in the code it changes. I think a lot of that just depends on how long it takes to implement it. In the case of these features, we actually already have a proof of concept based on that pending design. That obviously, that will change if the design changes. That's fine, but that's kind of the way things work. If you haven't, But my point is that if just to assume these two get approved, say 1 week from today, we'll probably have a PR ready to be reviewed within a week or two after that. That's just throwing numbers out.
But
the
and I'll
idea
just add to
being,
that, Scott.
Yep.
Historically, I think I've been around Velero for a while. There's a lot of people that will submit designs and then expect maybe the core Velero team to implement that, and that's not what we're asking. It's like, we would definitely do the work to get it implemented to ensure it cuts that release quickly. Maybe that's a little bit different to how the existing, hey, I need this design feature, but I'm not going to implement it. That's not kind of what we're pitching here. It's like, we just need this, so we'll get the implementation done, but we don't want to carry it in a fork. We'd rather get it upstream into an official release as soon as possible. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to it. In cases where one group of people has the design in mind, but they don't have the resources to write it, then clearly that's going to get pushed off to next release. But it's almost some of these features are like, okay, I need this done, so I'm going to write the design, I'm going to get the design approved, and then I'm going to immediately start implementing it. And so in that sense, you have a design and followed by an implementation that might be very close to each other, because the same person who puts the design together, once it gets approved, is actually already has the cycles available and allocated, to work on that implementation.
Okay, so for particularly this one PR, you're saying you want to have it approved in 1 week. I think that's a bit challenging.
I wasn't saying I want it in a week. What I meant was, if it got approved in 1 week, I imagine that we would be writing an implementation soon thereafter. I'm not proposing schedules here. I was just using that as an example.
Yeah, I'll check it and give you some update. My gut feeling is maybe more time we needed to make decision regarding whether or not we have this feature implemented in 1.9. Would that sound like reasonable to you?
And this may be a question as much for Dylan or Eleanor. I see kind of these as two different questions. This is a feature. Do we want this at all? If we do want it, does this design make sense? Whether it's in 1.9 or 1.10 or 1.11, that's a different question. That in other words, we could approve the design today and still say we're not going to work on this for 2 months because we're not, it's a low priority. So I think the roadmap question and the is this a good design question are really separate questions.
Yeah, my concern is, as I mentioned, and I think Dave raised some good point regarding the rollback scenario. That's my current comment, and I'll need to take a look, and I'll ask some other guys take a look. Dave, if you have any comment, please also add to this PR. I think that's all we're gonna do for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think my stance right now, or my idea is, give it a try and see how bad it is. It's not that hard to implement.
Well, we have implemented, actually. We've demoed it. So this isn't. I think we're more just kind of stalled in like a holding pattern in terms of if there's any feedback towards the design at all, because we have implemented it, we've tested it with the use case that our customer needs, and it does work for that use case. So I totally understand, Dave. You brought up a pretty good point that I actually didn't think about before in terms of like the transactional consistency. But we've got it solved for the use case we need. We're kind of just looking for feedback in terms of what you don't like about it, what we need to change.
Yeah, and I would say one thing based on what David said and the kind of discussion about the transactional thing, I think at a minimum that suggests to me that we need to be clear on some of the documentation around this feature, what the risks are of the various choices. And so if that's not, I don't think that's addressed in the design. I don't know if it needs to be or not. Maybe it's a question for Dave or someone else. But I think we do need to make whatever documentation that is part of this feature needs to be clear on, I think, what some of those risks might be for choosing things, and to make it clear that this choice is preserving legacy behavior. This choice means this other thing. Here's the risks, that kind of thing.
So you
Yeah,
want
it's not
the-
even really like a legacy behavior. It's a, it's a levels of risk, perhaps.
Yeah, but maybe legacy is kind of what I mean is current behavior. In other words, if you choose none, what you get out of Velero is identical to the behavior before this feature was added. Whether you want to, whether that's called legacy behavior or previous behavior, the point is that configuration choice is the default choice, and if you choose it explicitly, what you're saying is that I want nothing to do with this new feature, basically.
Well, or rather, you don't want this behavior. It's not necessarily the feature, it's the behavior. The feature is that you can pick different behavior.
Right, yeah, exactly. The behavior is unchanged. You're not changing the way Velero restores if you choose none. Whereas if you choose one of the other options, you're telling Velero, do something different than what was done in the past.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to give it a try, but I think that we are going to see people have wanted like Kubernetes rsync is what they're asking for, but I don't think they actually understand what that means.
Okay.
I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but I think we discussed this too at the community call a week and a half ago or two. I totally agree that like there's definitely potentially inconsistent behavior that could result from this. But at the end of the day, like if Velero is a tool, we don't want to necessarily safeguard it when users may know exactly what they need out of the tool, right? So
Also, the other thing is that the current behavior of don't update things that exist in any form itself is, possible to have the same kind of inconsistent behavior. If I make a change before I back up to say these two things need to work together, and then I restore those two things, but one of those two things is an old object, it doesn't get the configuration that points to its secondary object or whatever. And so that risk of inconsistent behavior is already there if you have a namespace with some of the resources there already.
Yeah, good point.
Can I ask a really naive question that plays into like, how do we protect users from hurting themselves? Plus it also plays into the CSI plugin brought to GA. Do you think it's reasonable to assume that most users are using the CLI? And so then if they install the CLI plugin, we can put a nice big block of text that says, watch out, not durable, blah, blah, blah. And for your feature, similarly, is there a place in the plugin where we can kind of, after they run a certain command, or, and maybe these are two different cases, maybe your feature would not allow that. I guess my question is, can we at least put a nice big block of text of like, watch out?
I do like that.
Yeah. Although now that I'm describing what I was just saying before about the fact that the none behavior is, I think, just as susceptible to this kind of watch out. I think really you have to watch out either way, because basically we're talking about, if you're updating things that are already there and you don't completely update everything, you might have inconsistent cluster behavior. But at the same time, if you're not updating anything, but you're getting all the new resources, you still have that risk of inconsistent clusters. Anytime you restore to a cluster that has some of the things already there, you have that risk already. I don't know that this feature increases the risk. It might. I don't know that it decreases it. It's essentially you're changing from some amount of risk to some different amount of risk, which is probably similar in scope. It may be slightly bigger, maybe slightly smaller. I don't know. It's not like we're taking something risk-free and adding risk, and it's not like we're moving risk.
The general advice has been, don't restore into clusters that already have things in them. Start, you're restoring namespace, make a new namespace, restore into it. You're going to restore the whole cluster, make a new cluster. That's been our general guidance.
And I think that should still be general guidance, even with this feature.
Right, but this feature does. So now we start to do this patching in place. I'm not against it, right? I'm just saying that we need to be very clear with people. Like you really do need to know what you're doing, and like if you expect that, for example, you're just going to roll your cluster back magically to where it was at yesterday, and this is your production cluster, maybe that's not what you want to do.
Oh yeah, yeah. This doesn't solve the problem associated with clusters already having things in them. It just changes the problem a little bit.
Right.
It solves some use cases. not others.
I think it's a documentation issue of really like, but what I've seen people do is they will grab a feature, they latch onto it, they go, ooh, let me try this, and then they wind up with a mess, and then they're mad.
Yeah.
Well, we are over time. We did not get a chance to look at the second PR. Might I suggest that we really appreciate you coming. Clearly, you're eager to get these reviewed. We will do our best. Ideally, the team can maybe talk today. The Beijing team can talk today and at least respond when we plan to review it to give you a kind of a predictability. In the next few weeks, hopefully we'll develop an SLA as we talked about. And dare I say, just an idea, just a general thought, because I know the PR review is onerous. I wonder, a question for all the engineers here who do reviews, would it make sense to like have engineers look at an initial PR and then actually even schedule half an hour with the submitter to talk through the PR? Just a question. I don't know. Like I used, when I was an engineer in the day, I really enjoyed kind of talking through code as opposed to just doing a code review by reading alone. I enjoyed kind of talking with the person about their code, but just a question about how to get these done faster and I don't know.
Yeah.
More
I
painless.
think for me, you know, it kind of depends on the kind of, if it's a code PR, it's usually easiest for me just to look at the code, comment if I need to, ping someone on, you know, Slack if I need to. You know, sometimes if there's a big set of changes, it makes sense to talk through it. Sometimes it just makes sense to comment on it. I think the design ones are a little bit, I think people are a little hesitant to jump into the design ones maybe because it's a lot of, you know, it's not just, okay, you know, what's wrong with this code is, you know, what is, you know, does it work? And I think too, for the code, bug fix, all that, you know, we have the system in place that auto assigns, which, you know, seems to work reasonably well. You know, it's still, we have to ping people sometimes, but I think, again, that auto assign thing doesn't work as well for feature reviews where we really want, ideally we have more than just the 2 reviewers that have looked at it. I mean, technically 2 reviewers, you can merge it, but really this kind of thing that you want a little more than just, you know, the 2 randomly selected people to look at, you know, because it's a design thing, it affects releases. So, you know, and that's why you.
So you're suggesting the SLA is mainly around PR review for design. Is that what you're saying? Because the code review, I think it's relatively in good shape. If it's pending for review, we just add someone and ask him to take a look. But yeah, I feel also this feature design, because like the post prayer hook proposed by Rafa and also this one, yeah, was not responded very fast because it was not on my radar, to be honest. I was not attending the community meetings in the US time zone. So I think we probably should establish an SLA focusing on the feature design PR review. What do you guys think?
I think it's a question to folks who have opened PRs recently. Like I'm not close to, yeah. So I guess the question, yeah, to the team here or to the folks here, is that the part that you have a bigger concern about?
I think I would pretty much agree with everything that was just said. I think there are exceptions. There have been PRs, especially PRs that have been contributed from people that aren't maintainers. I've seen those that have kind of sat there for a long time, and you know, it's hard to say too. In some cases, you know, these were old PRs that were submitted. The reviewers are not necessarily even on the team anymore. I mean, those are kind of exceptions. I think in general lately, bug fix, code change PRs mostly have been reviewed relatively in a timely manner. And when they haven't, people have been good about, you know, poking people to say, hey, you know, can you look at this? I know, you know, sometimes I'll get a ping on Slack to say, hey, look at this PR, and then I'll look at it, you know, and that's fine. I don't mind someone poking me if I haven't looked at something in a while, because, you know, we get busy, you know, it just falls off the radar, you know, that's fine. I think the design ones are kind of a special case. I think we've historically just not done well with getting to those in a timely manner. And the challenge there is those are the ones that we want the most people to look at, because, you know, we want to make sure that this is a design that the team as a whole, you know, agrees with before we start putting code in place and, you know, wanting to get reviewed to get put in. I would say for this one PR that we're not getting to today, if people could look at that and provide some feedback before next week, because part of the challenge too with the flip-flop meeting, you know, we have to switch the meeting times because of the time zones. But this other one, I think we did bring up last week, but again, there wasn't actually. Siobhan, I don't remember, did we get both of them last week, or was it the first one we went through both times? But, the issue was that the design came out last week. It was mentioned, but again, not everyone is on every call because of the time zone issues. So we didn't get to this week. So we can bring it up again next week and talk through it. But again, some people that are here today won't be here next Tuesday. So that's another challenge with some of these things. So I would say for people that aren't going to be, available next week, if you could look at this other review as well, and provide at least some feedback on that would be great. But understand, time commitments and such.
Yeah, so for this particular PR, we will definitely review after the meeting and give you some feedback within the next week. But regarding the decision point, I think we'll see. I cannot commit we make a decision. I mean, in 1 week.
Dare I say that to me, the SLA, the important thing of an SLA is when we give responses. I think that there's no SLA for like how long it takes total to merge in a PR, right? Like I think, do we all agree that really the important thing is, okay, we know within 3 days, we'll always hear back from something. At the worst, it'll be, we're trying to do this, we're doing our best, but we'll give some kind of response within a few days, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say that every design will be done and agreed to, within the next days, because, sometimes most things are, you're quibbling over details and you get the typos worked out and you're great. Sometimes, a comment comes up that brings up a use case that we hadn't thought of, and then that goes back and there's a major change, and that back and forth could take weeks, and that's okay because it's back and forth and changes are being made, and the design's improving. What's frustrating, I think, was mentioned is that cases where you have a design and it's out there and it's been 2 weeks and there's no you don't have enough feedback to move on. It's like, okay, do I need to fix the design? Is it broken and I need to make some changes, or are we good? We can get it approved and then we can start implementing it. And the work that's done next depends on the way the review goes. Because sometimes the design just needs.
So I think pretty much it's a matter of like trying to improve. So the issue's definitely there. I think that everybody's aware, and I think there's not like a magic wand anybody can wave at this point to say, hey, if you do this, it'll get better. The other thing I was going to suggest is go ahead and schedule an ad hoc meeting to discuss a particular item and put it out, on the mailing list, and figure out if the key people can attend at whatever time it needs to be, and just dedicate time to simply going through that. Community meeting is great, but we don't always have that much time to go through one issue. So there's nothing wrong with scheduling additional meetings. We keep them public, but I would do that too.
Great. So I think and Dave, I really like that you gave a few actionable. First of all, really like your point. Let's strive to improve. We're constantly learning and changing. And definitely your point about exactly reaching out and really pinging people, because we all get busy. We are 10 minutes over and I really want to respect people's time. So let's stop here. But I have learned a lot from this meeting, and we will definitely follow up on the things we talked about. So thank you all for coming, and have a good night or a good morning, depending. Yeah, I guess not a good midday. Have a good night or good morning, depending on where you're located.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.